Have you ever wondered why some people need constant reassurance and then other people pull away the second things get a little too close? Or why one friend can text back within seconds and the other disappears for weeks? A lot of this comes down to something called attachment theory. Today we're going to be discussing all four attachment styles, where they come from, what they mean, and how they interfere with our day-to-day relationships, whether it's romantic, friendship, or even our family. Let's get into it. In order to understand how a psychology term affects us in today, we have to look back on where it began. And our journey first begins with John Bowlby. I hope I'm saying that name correctly. He was a British psychoanalyst around the 1950s and the 1960s, where the reigning theory at the time was that babies created a bond with their caregiver as a byproduct through the milk that the caregiver was providing. But Bowlby said, no, it's not a byproduct. The bond is the entire point. And he had said that it is through survival instinct that the babies create this bond with their caregiver, because with no milk, no care from a caregiver, the baby simply does not survive. So in the terms of nurture and nature, this is in our nature to bond with our caregiver in order to survive. We are born with this survival instinct to know that we need to bond with this person in order to survive for our own good. And within his theory, he proposed the internal working model. The internal working model essentially is our blueprint. It's our template for how others perceive us and how we perceive others. Of, am I worthy of something, and are they worthy of my attention, of my love, of my dependency? And that this template is created the time that we are born because of our caregivers and the bond that we have with them, and it carries over into every relationship that we have from there. And some core words to take away from Bowlby is a secure base in which our caregiver provides us a safe environment for us to explore the world around us, and also a safe haven. So when we're out in the environment, something scares us, we know that we can return back to our secure base and feel loved and feel nurtured. So those are two key components of his research, which leads us to our next person. Following Bowlby in the 1970s, we have a woman, Mary Ainsworth, who was a Canadian American who studied developmental psychology, and she took the theory of Bowlby and wanted to test it. So this is where we first are getting some scientific experiment to study the theory of Bowlby to say, hey, is this true? What can we learn from it and what can we apply from it? So Mary decided to create the strange situation. And this is an experiment that is taught in developmental psychology classes and is most known within attachment studies, where you would have an infant and you would have the caregiver in the room. The caregiver would then exit the room and a stranger would walk in, and then you would have the caregiver walk in. And within the study, Mary is observing the infant's reaction to the caregiver leaving, to the stranger arriving, and how the baby reacts when the caregiver comes back in. And this is the first time that we can see these attachment styles that can be recognizable through repeatable experiments and tests. Through her research, she comes up with her three attachment styles, which are secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment, which can be repeated throughout different studies from Bowlby's original theory. So from Mary Ainsworth, we now have her student, another Mary Main and Judith Solomon, 1985-1986. And while they're reviewing Mary Ainsworth's study, they realize that there's something a little bit off that wasn't noticed in the original observations in the studies. They noticed a group of babies that acted a little bit odd. And we had these three groups here. We had secure, anxious, and avoidant, but there was another set of babies in there that kind of had a mixture of these two, and it just didn't really seem to fit any box in there. So they made their mark by creating the fourth attachment style that is known as disorganized attachment. But not only did they discover the fourth and final disorganized attachment within the studies of Mary Ainsworth in the theory of Bowlby, they also created the adult attachment interview. And it's at this point here in the late 80s that we are now able to conduct an interview with somebody for them to tell us about their experiences with a caregiver in order to make assumptions of what their attachment may be. And through this adult attachment interview is where we start to bridge what started as once childhood, just from milk from a caregiver to a baby, is now starting to move into adulthood. And then from Maine and Solomon comes our next history jump. Very soon after, and just 1 year later, probably inspired by the adult attachment interview, Sydney Hazan and Philip Shaver have now thought If this is from baby to caregiver in this attachment style, how does the secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment styles that are created throughout our childhood, does that reflect how we behave now in our romantic areas of life? So they opened up a brand new door in which attachment theories have never seen before of how does how we are raised as a child and the attachment we have with our caregiver relate to how we behave with our romantic partners in the world now. And through their studies, they found 3 different patterns. The secure adults who can get close without having any panic. They have the anxious adults who are always preoccupied with whether or not they are being loved back. And the avoidant adults who always just like to keep their distance. And we still have a little bit of a question mark here for disorganized attachment because it is just such a wide variety of what that could mean. And at this time, these attachment theories here were fit into a box. And these were more of fixed thinking, where now it's a little bit different. But those are just the patterns that they noticed within these attachment styles, therefore saying, hey, this is how we are as babies, let's bridge that into our adulthood as well. A few years later, after that, a little further down the road here in 1991, Kim Bartholomew finally created a visual map in order for us to see what secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized looked like, not just within boxes, but within a spectrum, and gave us a visual guide on how to fully understand what these attachment styles really mean so that we could fully apply them to ourselves and start to have a deeper understanding of what that means for us individually. She had proposed that these 3 styles here are very blunt. They are just boxes to be fit into, and there's not a lot of wiggle room there. But as we know through psychology, no one shoe fits all. So she decided to take avoidant here, split it in half so that we now have fearful avoidant and we now have dismissive avoidant. And this distinct separation between the two within the avoidant to better understand what disorganized attachment style means meant a lot because we were no longer fitting people into boxes that they couldn't understand, because we now know that people in the avoidant category can be split into multiple directions, and if we have a better understanding of them without fitting them under a label, then we have a better understanding of how to help them as well. Now we have this visual here from Kim that I'm going to show you now. So here we have a visual representation of what our attachment styles look like on a never-ending graph here. I know it kind of looks like boxes just because of the lines, but this is a grid. This is a graph. These are not boxes that somebody are completely fixed into. Just remember, you are never being fit inside of a box. You can always grow, and you're always going to be different than somebody that may have had similar circumstances to you. So here at the bottom, we have avoidance on our x-axis, and we have anxiety on the y-axis. So here in like a typical level, very low levels of avoidance, very low levels of anxiety, we have our secure attachment. I want to explain this a little bit more in television terms because I enjoy television, because my brain is more wired to think of things in a psychology lens, to where when I watch TV, I'm constantly trying to observe the patterns and the behaviors of people and almost apply that to what I have learned. So I'm going to kind of explain this in the terms of television. And starting with the first one here is secure attachment. This one is the one that we all kind of crave, I guess, and you don't necessarily see it a lot in television because it would be boring to us, right? Like if everybody went on Love Island and had a secure attachment style, there would be nothing entertaining about it. There would be no drama, there'd be no fights. It would just be healthy. So some people that I like to recognize here for Modern Family people is Claire and Phil Dunphy. Their relationship fits a lot within the secure attachment style. Also, you could say Paxton Holyoshida from Never Have I Ever would fit in that secure attachment style. And you could also even say Jeremiah from The Summer I Turned Pretty as well. He kind of maybe goes a little bit further into the anxious territory, but overall as a character, he's kind of in that secure attachment style there. So what is secure attachment? Secure attachment is when you never had to guess. You always knew that your caregiver was going to be there. You felt like you could go and explore the world, and you had that secure base, that safe haven to come back to when things got scary. You learned how to communicate your feelings, communicate your fears, and you weren't necessarily dependent on people, but you learned very young that you could depend on people when you needed to and when you wanted to, because your caregiver showed you at a very young age that they are dependent on, and they also also showed you that you are worthy of love and that you deserve to have that love as well, that healthy love. And not only do they have that comfortability and that confidence when they're dependent with people, but they also have that comfortability and confidence when they're independent. They don't feel the need to compete with other people. They know that they can lean on other people without feeling scared that something is going to be taken away from them or they're going to be hurt. And in childhood, we see this as parents that are not perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect, but the parent is reliable. And reliability is one of the most important factors within the attachment theory. And with secure, the parent is reliable. This child knows that I can go to my parent whenever I need them, my caregiver, whoever it may be, and I know that I can rely on them to be there for me when it's needed. And they taught me at a young age that I am worthy of having somebody to rely on. That becomes the internal working model for these secure people, that people are dependable and it's okay to lean on people, and I'm worthy of love. I would say arguably that secure attachment is one of the easiest to understand. So I just have here confident in others and themselves, that they're going to be there, they're reliable, they think other people are reliable, and closeness is not a threat. So going up on the anxiety spectrum here, we have the anxious attachment style here, which I would say that this one is kind of most known, and you kind of see it a lot more in television, specifically like those coming of age shows where the woman is the main character. Belly from The Summer I Turned Pretty, she's constantly looking and trying to find these little tiny signs that somebody is into her, or somebody's giving her attention. Her whole mind and her whole world is just kind of about finding things to find out whether or not somebody loves her. And that just kind of preoccupies her mind, which is why anxious and preoccupied attachment are kind of interchangeable words. These people are preoccupied with the idea of wondering, are they loving me? Can I love them? Do they love me? So Belly from The Summer I Turned Pretty is a really good example here. Another one would be Kare Bradshaw. You see throughout the show of her just imagining all of these crazy scenarios up in her mind just because she feels nervous about this closeness with somebody. And so she runs with her imagination there with all of her relationships. Another one is Devi Vishwakumar from Never Have I Ever, just like Paxton as well. That's the reason why their relationship did not work out. You have Paxton down here who is secure, and then you have Davy up here who is constantly looking for signs, constantly looking for these red flags, these alerts to go off in her mind of, I'm not worthy of love, like I'm looking for signs to prove to me I'm not worthy of love, which ultimately shows him that she's not confident, which isn't fair to him, and is ultimately why they break up in the series. Sorry, spoiler alert there. But Davy is another really good example. You could also fit Jenny from Jenny and Georgia up in this box here as well. She kind of teeters into the avoidant category as well, but typically that anxious, kind of just constantly preoccupied with whether or not people like her and think that she's worthy. So with those characters in mind, we can define anxious attachment style kind of like craving that closeness, craving that affection from somebody else, and staying on this high alert to anything that could signal that this connection is wobbling, or that this connection is just going to completely fall apart. Just on high alert at all times, just preoccupied with these thoughts. This is formed through our childhood from inconsistent caregivers. We no longer have this confidence that this person is always going to be here. We have somebody that's kind of here, kind of isn't here, and we're just left kind of confused on where we stand with our caregiver at all times. They're warm to us sometimes, and they're distracted sometimes, and they're bothered by us sometimes, and you just never really know what you're going to get when you come to them. So this is where we can see some people turn that volume up, where they're turning up that hypersensitivity to everything around them to try and find these signals, because we don't have a consistent pattern like the secure attachment. We don't have a pattern of, oh, if I come to this person at this time, I know that they're going to be here. So we have to try and guess in our heads what's going on. We are just hyper vigilant to everything that is going on around us. And this also can be seen with turning up attention, doing things in order to get more attention out of fear that if we just act the way that we are, we're not going to get that attention that we want. So you can see some of that attention-seeking behavior there, more out of insecurity as well. Insecure attention-seeking. So how does that translate into adulthood and your romantic partners and your friendships with your coworkers, your family now, is that can be reading into that text that you get for hours, not reading something for how it is, looking for the underlying clues and questions in somebody's behavior. It could be your boyfriend is off at work and they typically text around lunch break, but they didn't text at lunch break today, so they must be doing something, they must hate me, they must be cheating, and you go down this rabbit hole of why something might be happening once a small pattern starts to break. They have this constant need for reassurance, and they have something what researchers like to call protest behavior. And this can be in tests. You're testing your partner to see how they respond. This could be in jealousy. You're testing to see if that person will respond in jealousy, if this person will care if you do something wrong. This person will care if you do something to provoke a response from them. And this is typically where we see people getting lost in relationships, or they lose themselves, or they feel like they're too much, or they just feel like they're going down this constant spiral with their partner because they are so focused on trying to find one small clue to crack open something that they are losing sight of everything else that is important around them. It is all consuming. But again, this isn't a fixed box, and just because we may have had a caregiver that was inconsistent with us that might kind of relate to what I'm saying here, doesn't mean that you constantly have to stay in that box. If you have behaviors like that, there are things that you can do now, but the first step to that, to anxious attachment style, to fearful, to dismissive, even secure a little bit too, is becoming aware of your patterns. And for anxious attachment, it's going down that spiral of thought. So what you can do now, I always want to say therapy. It's not the best for everyone. Sometimes it's about the therapist, the type of therapy, but overall, I will always promote that because I am just a girl with a bachelor's in psychology. I am by no means educated enough to fully give somebody the roadmap and the answers that they need if they are in true distress. But for anxious attachment style, what that coping mechanism now can look like is finding those patterns, finding those triggers for you. And instead of reacting, it's the ability to take a step back, take a breath, and maybe it's journaling, maybe it's exercising, maybe it's going for a mindful walk. Something to take your mind away from that thought spiral so that you can allow yourself time to think logically, black and white, of he's not responding back in like 6 hours. Oh my gosh, I have to go down this thought spiral. No, you're doing it again. This has nothing to do with him. They've done nothing to prove to me that they are somebody that is untrustworthy. This is just the attachment style I have. I can take a step back. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's with friends. Maybe he has a headache and isn't looking at his phone. Maybe he just doesn't want to talk right now. And that's okay, because I will survive, and eventually they will come back. And if they don't, I still will survive. But I can further communicate this to them of sometimes I get anxious when blank. And it all starts with taking that step back and really thinking about what you're going to say before you say it. So that is the key to anxious attachment style. Now we're going into our avoidant styles, which are extremely misunderstood because this is where that third and that fourth kind of get jumbled up, and disorganized attachment kind of gets jumbled in there. So we'll start with our dismissive avoidant here. So we're not necessarily anxious, but we're really high on the avoidance scale over here. So our dismissive avoidant attachment style. Some characters that come to mind here are Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family, or from Wednesday. She has this very high level of independence where a small part of her does crave that intimacy with another person, but she's not ruled by it. If anything, she avoids it at all times. I don't know why with her parents, maybe because she just kind of got that rubbed in her face and just values independency over that extreme dependency of them. Another one could be Conrad Fisher from The Summer I Turned Pretty. He does kind of lean a little higher up in the anxiety, the anxious spectrum, but again, dismissing, trying to stay independent, trying to keep all of what he's going through to himself. And we see that because in childhood, for people with the dismissive avoidant attachment style, they don't have a caregiver to rely on. It's kind of the opposite of the secure attachment. However, they don't have to guess. guess. They don't have to guess like the anxious people if somebody's going to be there, because they know nobody's going to be there for them. They know that somebody's not going to be reliable to be dependent on, and they also realize in that moment nobody should rely on them either, and nobody should be dependent on them either. They learn at a very young age that they kind of are not worthy of other people's attention and reliability. Therefore, they build this huge wall up within themselves of knowing, I am dependent on myself, dependent on myself only. I can conquer the world by myself. I didn't even need my caregiver, so why should I need these other people? Why would they try and find that within somebody else? So it's very clear to them at a young age that they no longer need to guess. They feel secure that they need to be avoidant of everybody except for themselves. So how does that present now in the present time of people being a little bit older in their other relationships? This can be seen as somebody pulling away as soon as things get a little bit too close. They kind of reach that threshold, and then those alarms go off in their head of, oh no, like this person's kind of becoming dependent on me. I can't allow other people to become dependent on me, and I can't become dependent on anybody else. So then they start to have that feeling of smothered, and they kind of treat self-sufficiency as a personality trait rather than a defense mechanism. And they often get uncomfortable around other people's large and big emotions and can quietly exit relationships without anybody else noticing, because that can be a little bit extreme for them, just growing up with people that don't have those big emotions and not having the space to have their big emotions out loud. So being around somebody that could have those emotions out loud is like a little far-fetched for them and can be kind of a turn-off, you could say. So again, you don't have to fit inside of a box if this kind of resonates and makes sense to you. Same with the anxious one. But some ways of coping with that now could be when you have a close relationship with somebody and it starts to reach that threshold, once you kind of realize that you are entering that alarm signal, you can take a step back and realize this is a reflex, this is a defense mechanism, this is not who I am, this is not what I truly want. And instead of just fully backing away from something, actually leaning further into it, realizing that you can still hold independence in relationships with your partner through open communication of letting them know when you need space, letting them know when you need some quiet time, letting them know when you just need to be a person by yourself for a little bit, open and honest with them so that they can give you that space when you need it, so you don't have to just fully back away and you can have that time to yourself when you get a bit overwhelmed with whatever it may be going on. And over time, you will realize that this independence is chosen freely and not out of armor that you've built for yourself to defend yourself from everybody around you. And just over time, practicing these small bits of vulnerability, and over time starting to tolerate the unnecessary and realizing that the unnecessary is just a conditioned feeling that you've learned over time, and that becoming vulnerable with somebody can be necessary, craving that intimacy. Now we are entering in that fourth category. It is split into the avoidant, but this also is the disorganized attachment, if you want to just add another name to it, but the more accurate name for it would be that fearful avoidant. Here is our secure in our graph, and we have like max avoidance and max anxious attachment style wrapped up into one, and this is why it is called disorganized, because this one is extremely difficult to put into a box. I know you don't want to put these other ones into a box, but to a degree, there are certain behaviors within it that make it extremely recognizable, whereas this one, it's kind of more like a free-for-all. It's a little bit different. It's not as studied as much. Fearful avoidant, some examples that come to mind for me, Gossip Girl, you have Chuck Bass. He craves intimacy and he gets really, really close to somebody, and that's kind of like his whole character arc of like wondering if somebody loves him, but then as soon as him and whoever it is, Blair, get a little bit too close, then he fully backs away and just disappears off the face of the earth. And it's just this constant loop and this constant cycle. Some other examples of the fearful avoidant would be JJ from Outer Banks, and also Georgia from Ginny and Georgia. That one makes the most sense to me because I love that show, where she craves the intimacy, and it's almost like the point of her character is to be able to fully trust and get close to somebody, but we can never see it happen because the minute she she gets that closeness and that too close, something turns off in her brain, no matter how much she wants it, and she just has to fully back herself away. And it's kind of masked as the anxious, then the dismissive, then the anxious, and it's just this constant loop between the two of them. And we see this in childhood where the caregiver, that source of comfort, was a source of comfort, but it was also the source of the main fear. So your main comfort and your main fear is coming from the very same person. You don't know when it's going to come. You don't know when that switch is happening. You don't know if they're giving comfort, if they're giving chaos and that fear. So you're just living in this constant state of confusion and chaos as a kid. And the reason why this is characterized as disorganized attachment is because of this confusion of not knowing if it's comfort or if it's going to be fear and chaos and something scary. They have no plan. There is no exit strategy. There is no safety plan in mind. And it is just so disorganized inside of their minds and their thinking on what to do, what to say, when to say it, who to be around, when to be around them. And it's just a constant state of just hell, basically. Just fiery hell. This one arguably is the most trauma-linked attachment style, and the further up you go within this graph, the further it's pushed more into, hey, maybe you should outsource some professional help as well, because that is a lot more spaghetti up in the mind that is a little bit more difficult to untangle via a YouTube video such as this one. But I'm gonna give you the basic definitions and the basic understanding of it as well. So how do we see this now? Just like those characters, you see this intense push and pull. You see getting super close and then fully sabotaging it and just leaving everything behind. They have difficulty trusting, and it's one of the most difficult attachment styles to have in a secure relationship because that alarm sound and the fear sound are kind of going off at the exact same time. And at that point, it's really difficult to be able to trust your gut on, okay, this is what I know it should be, even though this is what I grew up thinking. Everything is just extremely intertwined, and it's hard to be able to distinguish between the gut feeling and the anxiety and the conditioned behavior versus what is reality and what is real. And so what does the work with that look like if you have a disorganized attachment style? That's where my full emphasis of therapy does come into play. That is where you start regulating your nervous system. That is where you go through cognitive behavioral therapy or exposure therapy, where you can fully unwind and organize the chaos, the fear, and the comfort in your mind through deliberate practices that are studied and proven upon in order to help allow somebody to feel that safe feeling in their mind. So I do encourage, if that resonates with you and you are struggling with what seems to be disorganized attachment style, you're struggling with your relationships, you're struggling with the inner workings of your mind and just living your day-to-day life, heavily encourage you to seek something out like that. I know it's not necessarily the most accessible thing in today's world, which is lovely, but I do heavily encourage that because that does typically require a little bit more attention from somebody that has a very outside point of view. But the most important thing to do, not just with disorganized attachment, with all of them, is to just provide yourself self-compassion, because the map and this blueprint was already laid out for you in ways that you couldn't even comprehend, in ways that you could never really influence or draw yourself. And now with the awareness of understanding where you are within your attachment style, by reviewing your childhood, who you are now, the way you behave, the way other people behave to you, you are able to look at that drawing, use it to the best ability, use it to your advantage, and you can slightly erase it and start to draw a new template for yourself and draw a brand new roadmap for yourself in order to lean back more into that secure attachment, further away from the avoidance, further away from the anxiety, something that just feels confident and something that feels like closeness is not to be feared and is not threat. So now we come to the end of the discussion of those attachment styles. I hope that one of them started to resonate with you. Maybe you're already aware of it. Maybe you're not in the place to become aware of that attachment style. But entering adulthood, into romantic relationships, friendships, and the way that we speak with our family members now that we are now in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, and so on, and we have removed ourselves from that environment in which our caregiver is there, I do heavily emphasize that you take the time to reflect and look back on your childhood, wonder what that attachment style may look like, because a lot of it may be the source and the pain point of what you may be going through on a day-to-day basis. I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but it could be. So understanding these points of your childhood, your attachment style, can help you understand how you behave with people in your day-to-day life. And once you become aware of something, once you can have a better understanding of it, then you can take action on it, which is where I propose your homework. I always give it at the end of my podcast and at the end of my videos, because I can talk and talk and talk, but until you actually take something and you apply it to your real life, it's really not doing you any good. And yes, I know that homework is one word, but it didn't look right, so I split it into two. So your homework after this video for this week is going to be take a step back, get your journal out, get your notes app out, or just sit and think in your mind, do a little visual journal up in your brain. Think of a relationship, one that may cause a little bit of distress, or one that's just really important to you, one that may be having a little bit of conflict, a little rift. It could be a partner, a coworker, your boss, your romantic partner, family member, mom, dad, whoever it may be. Think of that person, think about the relationship that you have, and instead of asking yourself what's wrong with them or what is wrong with me, ask yourself, what are they protecting? And ask yourself, what am I protecting? And whenever you take that judgment away of trying to just classify and solidify somebody into a box, and you can understand where they're coming from, what they're protecting and what they're scared of, instead of going more into the defense rather than the offense of things, you can have a better understanding of them and have a little bit of compassion, not just for them, but for yourself. So hopefully all of that made sense, and I'll see you guys back next week with another episode of Psych with Kare.